Welcome to the Fantastic Story Society, a place for the most unusual stories and storytellers, including your masters of ceremony, Max Tim and Scott Marcus.
Welcome, everybody, to the Fantastic Story Society. Welcome back, Scott. It is 2023, and it's been a little bit since we released something, but we have a true-ish, maybe crime episode for you today.
It's a good look at what is reality and how we as people, this is going to be so abstract that people aren't going to want to listen, but we all kind of like create our own narratives in our heads sometimes, and the longer we live in that space, we believe it stronger, even if there's maybe not as much to back it up as we think that there should be.
And I think that's what big fans of true crime tend to do. They are trying to figure out what's happening as the information's coming in. And so there is a narrative that even the viewer is thinking. And so that's why the show that Jason Woliner, our guest today, created and produced for Peacock is so interesting, because it does something different to the viewer than any true crime so-called documentary. It is a documentary, but there's like reenactments and things. True crime shows don't necessarily do that in terms of what this show does as far as our experience of it. So it's just really, it's a really fun show.
So we're talking about Paul T Goldman, which is streaming now on Peacock. Tremendous show. I can't overstate how much I love it. Every time I'm on a second rewatch right now, because it was just, there's so much to see, and then it's instantly rewatchable. Because especially once you get to the end, you kind of understand things more. And now you can go back and pick up different things. And, there's a question I had that I thought, this would be a great one for Jason, back before I even started watching the show, which is, people always say that television is a writer's medium and films are a director's medium. Where do miniseries fall, or mini docs fall? And it doesn't take very long of watching this to say like, oh, no, this is definitely his, Jason's a director. This is his medium, because this is such a uniquely crafted thing that he put together.
I mean, a mini series or a limited series or whatever the term is today, it basically is a movie, and this one was a 6-episode. Paul T Goldman was a 6-episode series where each episode is pretty short. It's like a total of about 4 hours for those 6 hours or 6 episodes. So you're basically making a movie. It's just a longer time frame. And so a limited series is very much that much more of a director's medium.
I was kind of thinking about our shows, Fantastic Story Society. And this one reminded me a little bit of our interview with the producer of The Murders That Starved Rock, the HBO miniseries, because that also is a mystery crime docu-series where you don't know one episode to the next. Your ideas of who done it changes. And boy, oh boy, the twists and turns in Paul T Goldman, which, by the way, much lighter subject material than The Murders at Starved Rock, which is a triple homicide of 3 women and blah, blah, blah. This is much lighter and quirkier because of the nature of the guy, Paul, who it's him telling his story. And he, I think, is just one of these guys that I would love to watch him announce a baseball game. I'd watch him do anything, because he himself is such a character.
It's such a character. It really is one of those things that you just can't. It took me a long time to really settle into him. Like, is this guy for real? Is this? He's not. I know he's a good person. Like, you can tell that, but he's so quirky that you are thrown off by it, but then you eventually do come around to being like, I think I like this guy. I know I do. But then that's what's so great about the way Jason put the whole show together.
There's a lot to admire about Paul, because, we spend these 6 episodes with him, and he is who he is. Like, he's not, I'm sure he's nervous his first day on set and all that kind of stuff, but really he's authentically himself the entire way through. And it would be a much more difficult job for Jason had he not been that. Just like unapologetically Paul.
Well, so other than watching those TV shows, there are a whole bunch of other shows that we've been watching. The world of TV is just filled with so many good things, but I haven't had that much time to do it. I had a 30-day challenge that I was in front of Zoom for 30 straight days in January into February, and that kept me really busy. And then just a ton of planning for this year. This is coming out relatively early in 2023, so Scott and I both have a ton of shit that we're working on, man. And this is going to be a fun year. We've got some adventures planned that we haven't completely solidified, but we're going to be having some fun.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, I just got back from Sundance. And if you're talking about fantastic stories, we were out there with the ISA celebrating an award-winning screenwriter that was with the ISA. She won the Table Read My Screenplay contest, Lindsay Galloway. And she wrote a biopic about the portrait painter for Marie Antoinette. So again, these are exactly what this show is about, is finding those really fascinating stories that maybe haven't been told enough, and also then finding a creative way to tell those stories.
Mm-hmm.
And Perez Owino, shout out to her, maybe a future guest of ours, another ISA writer who just had a show launch on Netflix just this past week called African Queens, which is incredibly inspiring and very cool that, as she says, like, we know all about Catherine the Great and Elizabeth and well, aren't there leaders in Africa too? And it turns out there were some amazing female African leaders, and that's what that series is about.
Perez herself is a queen. She's awesome.
Yes, she is.
Yes. I mean, what else has been going on? I mean, I think I'm just eager to get into having everybody listen to Jason's interview, but I've got a few retreats coming up this year. I've got a mini retreat that I'm holding in early May in Los Angeles. No overnight stay stuff, but and then I've got my live retreat here in the Lake Geneva area in October, and then a whole bunch of classes that I'm launching basically every month for the rest of my life.
And on the spookier side of things, for me, we just relaunched our.
That wasn't spooky. Classes for the rest of my life.
Well, I mean, if it's a punishment, then I suppose that's ancient medieval torture that would be banned by the Geneva Convention today. But no, we relaunched the LA Hauntings bus tour over in Los Angeles through Hollywood, which I'm super excited about. As of recording time, we've only had one go, but the next one is coming up very soon.
Nice.
And a shout out to one of our other previous guests, actually a couple, Robin Davis and Ted Williams. The Galena Ghost Conference is coming up in the end of March. So I am sweating over putting my outline together about what I'm going to talk about this year.
Oh, that's right. Oh, duh. You're going to present. Okay. If you haven't been to Galena, Illinois, it's such a cute little town. If you're looking for a little road trip or something this year, check it out. But I think we should just jump into Jason's interview.
Let's do this.
Jason's such a great, cool guy, really awesome career, tell some really funny stories. And if you want to, just about everything he says is a fantastic story, but we do have our little segment about, what his fantastic story is. And it is pretty darn fantastic. So,
and it's wild that a filmmaker has a similar fantastic story to John Ronson's, any regular listeners, and that is a very tense, scary, fantastic story. So this comedy director gets in some trouble sometimes.
Yeah. All right. Well, here is our interview with Jason Woliner, and you will be hearing from us all soon. Thanks for listening, everybody.
As we call into session today, we are honored to induct a new member into our Society of Storytellers. His comedy writing, directing, and producing chops run deep, having worked on some of our favorite shows, including What We Do in the Shadows, Parks and Rec, Last Man on Earth, Master of None, Eagleheart with Chris Elliot, the sketch series Human Giant, which he co-created as well as directing, just a number of comedy specials, including those with Patton Oswalt, Aziz Ansari. He was also at the helm for Borat's American Lockdown and Borat subsequent Moviefilm, which earned 2 Oscar nominations. Currently streaming on Peacock is his latest creation, something that I am calling the show of the year so far, Paul T Goldman. It's a 6-part series that at times feels like Curb Your Enthusiasm-meets-Dateline, a true mystery that twists and turns around the failed marriage of a real person and a real character in more ways than one, the titular Paul T Goldman. We know the marriage failed, but who exactly was the con woman he was married to? Welcome, Jason Woliner, our newest inductee to the Fantastic Story Society.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks. What an honor. I'm so psyched to be here.
Well, and I do have to say, and again, we were talking a little bit about some of our other members, and one of our fellow members beat us to the punch. David Ferrier has been on our show, and he is one of our posse. But anytime I think that we're on the same, following in the footsteps of David Ferrier, that means we're doing something right.
David's amazing. Yeah, no, I'm such a fan. It was so nice. Yeah, he had me on his podcast, and it was a really fun chat.
And man alive, Paul T Goldman. Wow, what an incredible journey that was. And we're going to really dive into the making of it, the impetus and all that. But thematically, I couldn't help it after I watched Borat subsequent Moviefilm over the weekend and then this. And one of the things that came out of Borat was this interesting little mini series that Amazon put together, which it was Debunking Borat was the name of it. And it took a look at some of the conspiracy theories that came up and then had the conspiracy theorists actually sit down with some experts and kind of delve into these theories, find the origins of them and why or how people are being misled. Paul T Goldman and this both seem like something that you're trying to achieve is getting to the core truth of a story. Is that fair to say, or am I just reading a lot into something?
No, that's true. I mean, actually, I didn't really have anything to do with the special that you're talking about, the Borat. We did 2 specials after Borat came out. One was really just like deleted scenes, and then the other was this thing you mentioned where they brought back Jim and Jerry, the 2, so-called conspiracy guys, as they were come to be known, and they, sat them down with experts. Hillary Clinton was on it, who they said was, drinking the blood of children in the movie, and but for that, Sasha hired kind of a separate team, and they kind of went off and did that, and I did help put together the deleted scenes and the bonus material and stuff like that. And then there was there was like a deleted scenes. Then there was one that was just kind of an extended cut of Borat living in the house with those 2 guys. But I mean, yes, certainly I've always been fascinated with conspiracy theories, conspiratorial thinking. It's become more and more, kind of just all around us and part of day-to-day life as, kind of the whole idea of objective truth has become more and more diminished. And so, I think it's an area that's pretty important right now in terms of looking at what is true and what's not true, and then looking at how, does it matter? Where does it matter? When does it start to matter if you live in a world of complete fantasy, partial fantasy? Some might say we all live in a world of partial fantasy in different ways. It's definitely an area I'm interested in.
Well, then enter Paul T Goldman. Yeah.
Enter Paul T Goldman, but also looking at, a whole bunch of the other work that you've done and worked on. You obviously are taking a comedic approach to a lot of what you just talked about. Other people might go dark, dramatic, etc. So where did the comedy come from? Like, is this something you've always gravitated toward? Did you have a funny childhood? How did it, why comedy and not something darker?
Oh, it's just my personality. I kind of am inclined to see things from, I guess, a more comedic perspective. I was attracted to, the very formative things for me that I would see when I was young was comedy, like Chris Elliot stuff and the show Get a Life he did, and later the show Mr. Show with Bob and David. A lot of people I wound up working with later were very formative experiences for me to see when I was growing up, because of the power comedy has to show you a new perspective, or really just kind of call bullshit on stuff, display irreverence in the face of established norms in society and thought and things like that, and just kind of look at things from a more outsider's perspective, or I guess acknowledge the absurdity that's all around us, and how fundamental it is to life. So I think that's just why I was drawn to comedy, and it was kind of a world I always wanted to be in. There's
a very real participatory quality to comedy compared to drama, where drama feels like this is what we're trying to say, this is what you need to feel. But as an example, I apologize. I wasn't able to watch your Borat movie because I knew that I would just be so incredibly uncomfortable.
No, I understand. A lot of people don't love being uncomfortable for whatever reason.
If I was with other people, it would be a lot more fun. But by myself, it's so cringeworthy. Like Paul T Goldman is pretty cringeworthy, but it's nowhere near what Borat is experiencing.
I mean, it might be. I think it might be more uncomfortable than the Borat stuff, where that's I think that stuff is relatively harmless in terms of. It's not really digging into people's lives. People are doing scenes, but, that character, Borat, is really just Sasha bringing this very cartoony character into the real world, interacting with real people, revealing different things about them through how these scenes are designed and whatever. But it's not really diving deep into anyone's life. This project was really about a real person, real people, and looking at real events in their lives, a lot of times events that were very unfortunate and very sad, and especially trying to balance that with moments that I thought were funny. For me, it's a more uncomfortable project, I would say.
Okay.
I'm saying I think you can handle Borat. If you got through Paul T Goldman, you go watch Borat too, I promise.
Okay, all right. To continue on that thought, I think some of the funniest moments, there are plenty of funniest moments, but in the pilot, there are a few times where it's mentioned, but then you also hear I don't know if it's you in the background or other people on set who are calling out to Paul saying, smiling, because he's smiling at
Oh
parts.
yeah, that was all me. That was all me. Yeah.
So how soon did you realize I need to include this in the recording of all of it?
That was really in the edit of it. That wasn't for camera or to be in the show. It's a part where he's finding out very shocking news about his wife's other kind of double life. And while we were filming it, Paul, who is not an actor, not a professional writer, it was one of his first days on set, was just so kind of excited to be there. He kept smiling. And I thought it didn't match what he must have been feeling at the time. And this project was never about making him look dumb or laughing at him, even though parts of it I always thought were funny. But it was about trying to take these scenes that he wrote and trying to put him in the middle of it with real actors and production value and try to make it look as good as I could and do justice to the material as best I could. So it was never about trying to make it weirder, more awkward or whatever. It was about allowing that stuff to happen when it did. But in that case, I felt like it was just killing the scene how happy he looked. It didn't make any dramatic sense. And so that was me trying to help his performance. He wasn't an experienced actor at all. I think he got a lot better as we were shooting the show, actually. But then when we were editing it, my editor, who edited the pilot, this guy, Mike Giambra, who I've worked with a lot, he put that in and we kind of looked at it together and realized, oh yeah, this is kind of an interesting little interaction. And despite the fact that I didn't really want to be in it, I thought it added something to it where you could see, oh, whoever made this is kind of trying to protect Paul. And I thought that kind of added a useful layer to watching it.
So before we go further down this rabbit hole, in case anybody listening hasn't seen it yet, we'll set it up a little bit that you were contacted. You were one of many directors that somebody named Paul T Goldman contacted with this real life relationship struggle. That's why Max said, actually, this was about a month ago, we should do an episode on dating with Valentine's Day coming up. I'm like, well, yeah, I saw a really interesting trailer recently that involved dating.
You were going to be our dating episode, Jason, but we decided.
Very romantic story.
Right. Where a guy gets married, marriage doesn't last very long, and then he ends up finding out that this now ex-wife has perhaps a very twisted second life he knew nothing about, and it's the journey of finding all of this. So you decided to take this project on, but it's not just a straight up, like I said, Dateline style documentary with talking heads. Yes, there are reenactments, but it's Paul, the main character, playing himself in these reenactments. And something that brings so much more is the fact that there's cameras rolling on set of the behind the scenes putting this all together. And that is just a whole additional level of fascinating. So
I'm just trying to imagine someone who hasn't seen the show listening to this and just thinking, this sounds like so much work to understand what the hell is going on. And that's part of what took me 10 years. I've been working on it for 10 years. And part of what I think took 10 years to make it is there's no simple, easy way to describe it. You could say it's like, Nathan For You meets The Jinx meets Tiger King or whatever,
yeah.
It still doesn't really tell you anything about it. But yeah, Scott, you're exactly right. It's a true crime style story. It's a documentary. I call it a documentary because to me it's a profile of a real person, and I'm trying to do it in a way that I feel is truthful. But to do it involves a lot of artifice. It involves shooting scenes that this real person, Paul, wrote about his life, and he's starring in these scenes with real actors. And then we're also showing the making of these scenes. And then there's also interviews with Paul. There's interviews with other actors. There's interviews with private investigators and lawyers involved in these cases. So it has this layer of true crime. It also has this very kind of meta layer of it's about the making of itself. And it's all kind of toward the end of taking a camera inside Paul's brain and kind of trying to figure out this guy that, 10 years ago I became extremely fascinated with.
So as you talk about how difficult it is sometimes to explain, that was your job at one point pitching this. Because again, we have a lot of creatives that are listening to this. Did you know that it was going to have all of these elements going in, or was that something that kind of came about on set? And how did you pitch this over 10 years?
No, I always wanted all those elements to be in it. They became a much bigger part of it than I originally anticipated. I really thought it would, at first, I didn't want to give people any information and kind of just shoot Paul's script with him in it and real actors and some behind the scenes, but really let people kind of figure out what it was. And I think that would have just been incomprehensible. And so it just kind of gradually, as we were shooting it, it became more clear how we needed to at least hold people's hands a little bit through the beginning of kind of explaining what it was. But in terms of pitching, he tweeted at me 10 years ago. He said he had an incredible story. I read his book. I read his screenplay. I, eventually got in touch with him and told him I wanted to do it. And the idea was to do it in this very unusual format. But in terms of pitching it, I work with I direct for a commercial production company called Caviar here in LA, and they were starting like a film production wing, and I knew they were looking for stuff. And so I met with the person there and told her, I have this guy, he tweeted at me, it's crazy. At first, actually, I went down with a DP friend of mine and like two friends, and I just interviewed him. And there's a few seconds of that in the show. I just talked to him for a few hours, and I thought it was incredible. I edited that into, a sequence of a few minutes, and I brought that to a person at this company, Caviar, and they said they would be on board and help me try to sell it as a feature at the time. And then that began a few years of, meetings and sending my little reel to indie documentary financiers and trying to get them to bite. And I'd say, I want to, do these reenactments in this way. And they'd say, well, who could star in it? I would say, well, Paul's going to star in it. And that didn't get me very far. And then in 2014, we went down to Florida and shot what became the kind of main interview of the show, this against a blue-gray background. We shot over 10 hours over 2 days, and he just told me the whole story, and I asked him questions, and I sometimes would challenge him and sometimes would kind of contradict him about things I had discovered, and he would reveal some of the stuff that wasn't true that he had embellished, and we just kind of got into the whole story. And then after that, we brought him out to LA, and he did kind of these test auditions with actors, and through that process, he kind of came to believe that he should be playing himself in the show, and then so from the new interview and the test auditions and some documentary footage, cut a new reel of like, I think 4 or 5 minutes, but still didn't have any kind of proof of concept of what the actual show would feel like. But used that, pitched it around to everywhere at the time in 2016, and Hulu said they would do a pilot. And so we shot a pilot for 4 days, and that became a lot of the first episode. And then Hulu didn't pick up the pilot, and it's all kind of detailed in the show. And then it was, okay, we're at square one, but we have now a half an hour of these scenes starring Paul. So it was really just inching along, accumulating more and more, basically proof of concepts that, pitching always, especially in something like this, pitching is so hard to convey tone, where you're just trying to describe something that is going to be very different than anything you can point to. But if you have a clip you can show people, if you have, 10 minutes or whatever. So after this pilot, I was able to show people 10 minutes and say, this is what the show will feel like. It's going to be these scenes. Here's how it will be funny and interesting and moving and disturbing and all these different things. And then I kind of paused. We almost sold it to Quibi. I got the Borat job and so paused it for about a year and a half. And then as soon as I came off that, pitched it again. And that's when Peacock bought it. So it really was a kind of cumulative process of just shooting, failing, but having a little more each time, to the point that I finally got them to agree to do the show.
There has to be a little bit of a worry that, letting it be known that Paul contacted you means that you are open for unsolicited pitches constantly.
A few people. Someone tweeted at me the other day. I was like, yeah, I have another story about hookers and crime, and I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna respond to that. No.
Oh god.
Why would I? No, I did that. I learned my lesson.
That's not your sweet spot. You're not just gonna live there.
Well, I just followed you, Jason, so I'll make sure to load up your DM box with this weird request. So Peacock bought it, but when did Seth and Evan come into play? Did they help in the sale process?
Real quick, the Seth and Evan that Max just referenced is comic actor Seth Rogan and his producing partner Evan Goldberg. They have teamed up on everything from Judd Apatow movies to the recent Pam and Tommy limited series on Hulu.
Yeah, so Seth and Evan, basically in 2017, we shot this pilot for Hulu. In the middle of that, they got a new boss in. He said he didn't like this kind of a show or something, and then they passed on it. And so myself and my producer at Caviar, Michael Sagal, were like, what do we do to inject some life into this or give it another shot? And Seth and Evan do commercials for them as well. And I was friendly with them. We had been working on stuff years earlier. And so we sent them the pilot, and they said, we love this. Let us know what we could do to help. Then we sent it around, basically. And so what happened was Seth went with me to meet with Jeffrey Katzenberg at Quibi. So then they have a deal with Lionsgate, the studio. They wanted to take it to Quibi. It hadn't started yet. It was an idea that everyone was like, is this going to work? Is this going to work? And we went and we pitched it to Jeffrey Katzenberg. It's the only pitch I've been involved with where the person was basically like, yes, sure. Because they were doing everything, and their whole thing was like, yeah, we're not going to pay a lot of money, but we'll take, from people we like, we'll take the idea that you have been struggling to get off the ground. And they were like, yeah, we'll do it. We'll give you it wouldn't have been very much at all. I wouldn't have been able to do kind of what I did. And I was very skeptical that Quibi was going to work. I also really, I didn't want this to be on a phone. I was like, are you going to have a TV app? And they were like, yeah, maybe eventually. I was like, all right, okay.
You gotta shoot the whole thing vertically,
Oh, I had a meeting with them where they used the term, the verticality of this, and they were showing me how it would crop, Paul's face when you flip the phone, and I was like, okay, all right. I don't need to knock on Quibi anymore, but
Dancing on his grave,
I was happy this didn't wind up at Quibi. Although now if we made it for Quibi, it would be on Roku, which is doing very well, I think.
That's
so.
true.
The stuff that was made there did have a life, which is good for the people that made it. So in the middle of that, we didn't make an actual deal, but Quibi was like, yes, we'll do it. Then I got Borat. I was like, I need to pause this. And then after Borat, we're like, all right, Quibi's gone. Let's take it around to everyone one last time. And then Seth and Evan basically recorded a 1.5-minute video. It was in COVID, so it was like on Zoom, where they just kind of gushed about the show and me. And it's like, yeah, when you have famous, successful people vouching for you, and that's the first thing these buyers see when we were sending this little reel around, it's like, oh, Seth Rogen is saying that he thinks this is going to be an amazing show. And then I had, I think, 8 minutes of scenes from the pilot. And then we did a round of pitches where I just talked about, hey, it's experimental. I have an idea. I have a shape of it in my head of where it goes from, basically him telling a story. It feels like a true crime. It kind of takes a turn at this point. It ends up somewhere around here. And I was like, yeah, well, we'll shoot his scenes and we'll see how it goes. And Peacock, was into it. They went for it. Seeing it now, it's so much more, I think, genuinely experimental than most stuff that gets put on streamers that I still just, it feels like kind of a miracle.
It had to have kind of feel that way when you were making it. Like, how much of a script did you really follow? Because in the editing process, it seems like there's so much. Because part of my favorite little parts is when the camera's pointed at Paul talking to some of the actors, just kind of
between takes,
hanging out on set.
Yeah.
And then I'm just constantly staring at the actor, like, how is this person going to react to? And it's so uncomfortable. And it's so uncomfortable that it's like that actor's acting. This is part of the thing, but it wasn't. It's just real.
I don't think anyone was playing up the awkwardness on purpose. No, you can tell when people, there's a lot of The Office and whatever comedy awkwardness, and you can, I think viscerally as human beings, we can tell when there's real awkwardness that we're watching on screen.
Was there a moment where you like, okay, yeah, no, I have something amazing here? Was there any lightning light bulb moment?
Every time we shot with him, it felt like some kind of miracle would happen. It always felt like a very special thing. That's why I kind of never gave up on it. I felt like I need to see these scenes on screen, and I need to get this thing done because it's become such a part of my life over the last 10 years. But for instance, the day one of shooting the series, so the process, we had two cameras that were on prime lenses that we shoot all the scenes kind of cross coverage so that Paul and the actor that he's acting with, we would have a camera on both of them. We wouldn't like shoot it one way and then turn the room around and shoot it the other way, as is more typical on stuff when you have a little more time to really light each side of the room. On lower budget stuff, that a lot of it is stuff that I've done. DPs hate it because you sacrifice some a level of quality in the way you can light, but in terms of anything where you're doing improv and you want both sides of an interaction, it's going to be better to get both actors at the same time. In this, I knew there would be moments that would only happen once. So I was like, we always need a camera on Paul. We always need a camera on the other person. And then we had a third camera, a friend of mine, a documentarian named Jason Tippett, who had made a documentary I really loved and has this kind of a great eye and just a wonderful like fly on the wall style where he can just set a shot and just kind of figure out where's the best vantage point for something interesting to happen and just kind of roll forever. And so a lot of times he would just be on a wide shot, and we used a ton of it. And then between scenes, he would go interview an actor, interview Paul. There's stuff where people are talking about me or talking about the experience. I wasn't even there for that. I was off, figuring out the next scene, and Mr. Tippett would just be kind of talking to people. And so that was the process. We'd have 3 cameras and they'd always be rolling. And the idea is that none of the actors would be introduced to Paul before they were on set. We had this one PA named Tyler who was like the Paul handler, who would just because Paul would always want to be around, and every time he was around, really funny things would happen. So I didn't want him around until we were ready.
Save it.
So he would keep him in the trailer, babysit him, make sure he's not meeting the other actors. And so the very first day, we're shooting in this, we mocked up this little set to be like an Italian restaurant in Moscow. And then, and we're rolling, we get everything set. And Paul walks in, and the actress, Natasha Blazik, who was playing Svetlana, who's this woman who he was corresponding with in Russia, who came thinking that he would, marry her and take her home as a quote unquote mail order bride. She sits down, they meet each other in that moment. And she starts saying, it's amazing that we're doing this scene because actually I am a mail order bride, and you hear it, you see it in the moment where I'm just like, "Whoa, we didn't know that," and that's true. I mean, we had no idea. And every day there were these kind of weird, miraculous moments like that, where I was just like, "Oh yeah, there's kind of a scary, special energy to this." So it just always felt like a special thing.
Yeah, I mean the scene that I think will always stand out as maybe the most memorable to me is early on. I don't know if it's the first or second episode, but auditioning women to play his ex-wife, and then his ex-wife is in the room watching the auditions, and then she sits in, and they run through the script together. It's wow. that
was the first time, I think, because that was the first time where we were filming with him, where it wasn't just an interview where I was in his house, asking him questions. And we were filming. He wrote in this, his first wife was a different woman from Russia who he had a child with, who came over here. The marriage didn't work out. And we go over it in the second episode. And we were shooting auditions to play that character. And he said, well, the real Talia, her name is Galena, is a doctor not far from here. And why don't we invite her? And I was, sure. and and she was watching. And then on camera, Paul suggests, well, you want to try it out? And she, she's not an actress, but she sat down, and suddenly these two people are reenacting their breakup from 10 years ago while their then, I think 12-year-old son was watching, and, or 10-year-old son at the time. Yeah, 10 or 11. And, I mean, it was really intense and insane, and that scene's in the show. I mean, that was probably the first time where it was like, oh, wow, we're getting really interesting stuff every time we shoot with him.
And that has nothing to do with like the crime element of it. It's just humanity, people being people.
Yes, absolutely. And that's it. It's kind of not really a true crime show. I mean, the crimes in it, I don't want to give anything away too much if people haven't seen it, but it's not about the crimes that may or may not have happened. There's definitely some crimes in there, whether they're the crimes that Paul's alleging or other kind of crimes. There is crime in the story, but it's not what the story is really about. The story is about Paul and these other real people, and really it's kind of this very unique quest for identity or love, companionship. There's a lot going on, but it kind of only feels like a true crime.
Yeah. I want to get one more in about working with streamers before we get too far off of that topic. Now that this is out, do you know, like, what is your interaction with Peacock, which is, of course, where people can watch this? Do you know what the benchmarks are? What equals success in this world? Or is it all just, we'll see if they call me back?
No, I have no idea. We did one call right after the show came out, and I loved working with Peacock. Creatively, they were amazing. They really were amazing partners on this, and made the show much better. It's the best experience I've had with executives. It was definitely, there was a decision made somewhere at the top that they weren't going to spend money marketing the show, so there was no ads bought for the show. and I think there were some videos in taxi cabs in New York, but there was a very little. They were counting on it to be like a word of mouth show, which, look, I understand there's no famous person whose face you're putting on the billboard, and I'm extremely grateful that we even got to make this crazy show. But it became clear to us that they weren't going to put any marketing muscle behind it, and they also wanted to release it New Year's Day, And I was like, that doesn't seem like the best day to release it. And we had all these conversations about that, just begging them not to put it on New Year's Day. They go, oh, New Year's Day is a big day. It's the biggest day for streaming. And I was like, I think people are just like hungover and want to, watch The Office, watch shows they know. And that's probably why it's a big day. I don't know if they're going to turn on like a really challenging, weird show with a guy they don't know.
Right.
And so we had one call a few weeks later that basically they're like, oh yeah, you were right. Like it's a big day for Peacock, but no one watched anything new on it. And I was like, yeah. Like,
These are the executives telling you this.
Yeah, which I like the executives a lot, but yeah, marketing didn't do anything for us. And so they said week 1 to week 2, there was like a 20% jump, but I'm sure week 1 was so low. I felt a wave on the finale. There was like a wave of internet response where it felt like people were starting to become evangelical about it and tell their friends and spread it around. And then just last week, they told us they're setting it to autoplay after Poker Face, which they did put a ton of marketing and money behind, and is a big hit for them. And I love it. I think it's a great show. And so I think that has been like another way they can push it. I'm very grateful for that. But, it's another way to do it without spending money. So we're supposed to have a call on Friday to find out more information. I mean, the thing about this show is I'm not trying to get a second season of it. So in terms of like for me, I'm very happy. The response has been so nice. Everyone I respect has said the nicest things to me. People get it. Like on that, movie site, Letterboxd has some like very beautifully written, thoughtful stuff about it that people have posted. That's all I could ask for. I know it's a weird show, and no, not a lot of people have Peacock either. I mean, the stuff that is a bummer to read is like the many tweets I've read saying like, man, if this were on Netflix, everyone would be talking about it. But it's like, well, yeah, so Peacock wanted to do the show, so it's not like I had a choice to where do I do it? It's like, well, you do it where people invite you to do it, and so it's a very weird show, and I'm very grateful that it's uploaded even.
Well, I'll thank Peacock is Cyber Monday. They had to get the year for $12, and I got it then. So keep it up. That element of Peacock marketing.
Yes, there was a really cheap deal. I mean, yeah, no, I can't complain. I mean, they spend a few $1,000,000 to make the craziest show that's ever been on a streamer. So good for them. Thank you, Peacock.
Yeah.
Well, we do highly suggest all of our listeners to watch this. It is one of those things. My sister is big into true crime. Like she's a nutcase when it comes to true crime documentary stuff. And I'm really curious to just tell her, like my little marketing for her would be, there's this crazy true crime show on Peacock. Here's my login. You should watch it. And then just see how she responds. Because I think after the first episode, she's going to be like, what did you suggest? Because it's like true-ish. Some crime.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, people have strong reactions to it, but most of what I read is people go, oh, this is the craziest show I've seen. Don't read anything about it, just watch it. And usually if people watch it, they'll watch 1 or 2 and they'll kind of, luckily it's under 4 hours total. It's not a huge investment, in this bingey time that we live in. So, people get through it, and usually by the end, people are into it.
Was there a mandate to have it be 6 episodes? Because I know we've all seen some contained series that feels like, oh man, they really stretched one of these episodes out to try to make it to some goalpost that they were going for. There's so many twists and turns in this story that it always feels packed full of content, and it feels like maybe you have to fight to get it down to 6 episodes.
Yeah, well, I wanted to do like 7 or 8. They were adamant on 6, even though we have hundreds of hours of footage, so we could have done more without even shooting anymore. But I think they were correct to keep it at 6. I feel like people, I have such a high. It's basically, a lot of the last few episodes are these kind of spin-offs and just fully fictional stuff that Paul started writing, which I found so interesting and revealing and funny and fascinating and amazing to watch this guy's internal monologue, repeated back to him by like an action hero, and he suddenly is in all these action scenes. And I thought it was so interesting. What we found is, even just testing it with our friends, that normal people don't have the same appetite for that kind of stuff as I do. So I think, I could have made this 10 hours long. I think it's probably best at 6 episodes.
The extended Goldman verse is a fun place to play in, though.
Releasing a few more scenes, hopefully on like YouTube or something.
Oh,
Cool.
nice. Yeah. But you're friends with Paul now, right? Like this is become a long-term friendship kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a friendship for a long time because we wound up, engaging in this quest together to get the show made. And so, yeah, I mean, he would check in with me a lot. And, like any intense kind of friendship, sometimes we drive each other crazy and sometimes we're on the same page. And, I was a little worried that it would end after it came out, or, I never wanted him to feel burned by it or betrayed. And there was a little bit of, navigating how he felt about certain things that I put in it or certain things I was saying with the footage I put in it. He's still friends with Terry J, the psychic that's in it. And, I kind of throw her under the bus at the end because I don't feel like she behaved in the most responsible way. But, and Paul, Paul is protective of her, and I understand that. So there's stuff like that we had to kind of get through, but we seem fine. No, I mean, he knows. I mean, I've been doing a lot of these interviews, and he listens to them. He'll probably listen to this one, and he knows I'm out there saying, Paul is not crazy, and this wasn't an attempt to make fun of or destroy a person. This was, an attempt at something more interesting than that. Yeah, so I think we're still, as far as I know, we're still good. We still communicate, at least over text, nearly every day.
Nice.
I assume you planned from the beginning or early on to do your own independent research to some of Paul's claims. Did Paul have any idea that you would be doing that?
Yes. Yeah. He knew we would be just looking into everything, pulling police reports, pulling all of the records. I told him we had a responsibility to. This is real people and, real people's lives. And we can't, if he's alleging anything that is provably not true or that there's another side to that we really need to examine, that has to be part of the show. So that's why even, in the last episode, we go to speak to some of the people who he villainized in the show. And I told him we were doing that. I mean, I showed it to him in the show. So yeah, he knew we had a research team. We were getting into everything. I didn't know what the truth was until the very end. The truth is I was able to determine it. And probably by design, I didn't want to know a big piece of the puzzle and have to hide it from him while we were shooting. So we kind of shot the show. We shot the bulk of the show in 15 days, the kind of reenactment stuff, the dramatized stuff, 15 days last May. And then a few months later, while I was editing, took a week or 2 trips to Florida to find all the real people that would talk to us and figure out what was real.
Well, I have to thank you for something that you did, which I'm going to talk about something on the last episode, but it's not a spoiler for the story overall. But I think so often people are watching a show, a documentary, and you wonder like, oh gosh, I wonder what these people think about it now that it's edited and out there. And we actually get to see the premiere of the first episode. And we get to watch Paul watch the first episode. So that was, again, another very powerful moment of that we as an audience, I don't think I've ever remembered seeing anything like that before.
Thanks. Yeah, I haven't seen that kind of explore the subject's reaction to it within the actual piece. I mean, that was the only way we could do it is because I convinced Peacock to let me, they released the first 3 on January 1st, and then we went week to week. So we had a few days to kind of lock and finish that last episode before we had to deliver it after the first ones had already been released. And so I was able to include some of the reaction to the show in the end of the show. And yeah, that was always something I wanted to do. And actually at that screening, we watched the first 3 episodes. So we watched about half the series. And then when I went to speak with Paul, I showed him some more. I showed him some clips from the last episode. So because I really did want him to understand the tone and what we were going to be putting in the show, so that he could honestly react to understanding the full picture of it.
So you mentioned, and as our listeners know, we sometimes dive into kind of the weird supernatural paranormal stuff. You mentioned that you thought the psychic didn't act as responsibly as she could have. So maybe explain that. Do you believe in psychic abilities and that weird stuff or not? And either way is fine,
Oh, I don't have a strong opinion or disbelief. And that was why I'm critical of her in the show, but never of her abilities, or saying that she's a fraud or anything. I wouldn't want to make that assessment. I don't know. I think that there aren't things operating on a level that we don't understand would be the most foolish thing you could ever think, because every period in human history we've always thought, well, we've pretty much figured it out, and then 100 years later they've figured out. So of course there are things going on in terms of everything, how everything works, physics, energy, everything. Of just there's levels of it we haven't begun to grasp yet. So of course I can't say that I don't believe in extrasensory things, or that they're, you and I are feeding each other signals now on a sub-perceptual level that we have no idea what's going on. I mean, all these things are going on that we have no idea. So to say like, oh, there's only, I mean, that would be like saying, well, Wi-Fi can be real because I can't see it. It's like, well, there's, so I don't know. But what I do believe, in the last episode we get into some murder allegations, and she was very adamant and kind of acting out what she saw as happening, and then going and that was part of our investigation, is going to Florida, talking to the real people, looking at the actual evidence, and coming to realize that, to me, all the stuff she was saying related to that was just kind of fanciful fantasy and fun for her. As we present in the show, this was like fun play acting. It's fun the same way you have fun imagining true crime, and the way a lot of true crime say, "Ooh, is this person the killer? Is this person the killer?" It's like, well, one of those two people is an innocent person you're accusing of being the killer for fun. And the other one's maybe the killer. Maybe they're both completely innocent. So it was a way to look at the kind of nefarious nature of the fun side of true crime. Yeah. And then looking back at the 11 hours of recorded phone calls between Paul and Terry J, through the course of the edit, didn't go in with this intention, but through the course of the edit, our editor was like, oh yeah, she was definitely spinning him out, sending him off. He is an impressionable person. He's definitely responsible for his own actions, but there was an element to the story that emerged where it's like, oh, she was saying, this is your mission. You have to take down the crime ring. She did it. She's this. Go here. Go to this. I mean, there's stuff we didn't even put in the show where she's like, go to the hotel that they thought she was operating out of and pretend you're looking for a girl for the night and see what they, if they put you in touch with her. And he's like, oh, well, the cops told me that's illegal. She goes, oh, the cops told me that they can't do that. It's illegal. And she goes, well, it's not illegal if you do it, or something like, it's like, and we didn't even put that in the show. So it's like, oh yeah, she was definitely like egging him on. And I think in kind of a reckless way, I will say. And to me, that examining that had nothing to do with poo-pooing any psychic ability she claims to have. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, something is explored, and this isn't to say that Terry J is doing the same thing, but she might. We don't know. You do highlight a former private investigator that Paul used, and this person was obviously just happy to allow Paul to keep creating his own reality and reinforcing that because they're on the clock. And so there's danger with just kind of believing, allowing yourself to believe your own narrative and never even questioning yourself. I think that is this theme that pops up a lot in some of your recent work, at least, whether it's intentional or not.
No, I think there's definitely a thread. I mean, the Borat stuff, I was involved in the writing a lot for months, but it was definitely something in the air and in the room. It wasn't necessarily me. That's something Sacha Baron Cohen is very passionate about, is kind of combating conspiracy theories and conspiratorial thinking, and just seeing how destructive that has been in the modern world. But it's definitely something that I've been very interested in. I wrote a movie. My friend Andrew Weinberg and I sold to Warner Brothers a few years ago. Nothing ever came of it. Nothing will. But it was like all about conspiracy theories in a world where like this guy, it was a comedy, so it's like this kind of dumb guy finds himself at the center of, like, he's kind of against unwittingly been used as like the chief cog in like this massive global interdimensional conspiracy theory. And so but it was like, it was pre-Trump. It was like there was like a funny Alex Jonesy character before anyone outside of Fringe World knew who he was. And and then everything changed in the last whatever years, and so it became less innocent. I will say
conspiracy theories used to be fun. Yes.
Totally. I was just going to say, Scott, yes. I used to love them. I used to love conspiracy theories. Now it's like, whoa, I got to pick and choose which one.
Yeah.
You do have a handful of people that you've worked with a number of times, frequent collaborators like Brett Gelman, Aziz Ansari, of course. Any future team ups with Rudy Giuliani?
we're kicking some ideas around of different places he could be humiliated in, and just a show where he gets pranked every episode by a young woman. Rudy was intense. That was an intense day.
so the joke aside, I wondered, is there an element of, this is something we have to address with a production company, the possibility that somebody will be depicted accurately on camera and then lawsuits will still come. Because I got to imagine there was some blowback from Giuliani's team and maybe other people from Borat or this that are not happy with how they were depicted. Is that something you ever have to deal with?
I don't think so. There were a lot of lawsuits for the first Borat movie, but everyone in Borat, including Rudy, signed a very ironclad release, and that had very clear language about what they were, whether or not they read them carefully or read them at all is, people were handing them, they're saying, you sign this, read it and sign it, and this is what you're agreeing to. Obviously it doesn't say Borat, but,
Yeah.
no one's going to spend money on that type of project unless they know it's releasable. So Sasha has, I think the best First Amendment lawyer in the world, this guy, Russell Smith, who's just never lost a case. They had 1 million lawsuits after the first Borat movie. We had one thing after this one, and it wasn't even from the person in the movie. It was from this woman, Judith, who was in the Synagogue, who passed away between a shooting and the movie coming out. And her daughter, I believe, hadn't seen it, but thought that it was, a kind of a pranky thing and whatever. Anyway, it got thrown out. That team is very careful about what they do.
And that was actually one of the more heartwarming scenes, probably maybe the only one of the movie. That was really sweet.
Yeah, it was very, oh my God, I was crying that day on set talking to her afterwards because her story was so moving and it was so touching that I was literally crying talking to her afterwards. Because afterwards we did come clean. That was the only time in the filming that we came clean about the whole thing because this was someone who survived the Holocaust and we wanted to make sure it was totally clear that this is not something, the purpose of this shoot was to put out there in a way that millions and millions of people will see that the Holocaust was real and an effort to combat, this rising anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, and to actually have a Holocaust survivor, in front of millions of people in a world where there are not that many of them left. And she understood it immediately and got it and was so cool about it. And she was just so poised and moving. It was extremely powerful. Yeah. No, and so I think her family member that heard or figured out that she was in a Sacha Baron Cohen thing just thought, oh, they made my mother look like a fool before. And I mean, we had one hearing, it was thrown out and never heard about it again. But I hope she eventually saw it and saw how kindly her mother was depicted.
Yeah. Well, you may have just answered what I was going to be thrown out because that is a fantastic story. But we have a little segment in every one of our interviews where we ask the guest to tell a fantastic story within the field that they have been working in for so long. So I was going to ask, what is one of your most memorable moments on set? That sounds pretty memorable.
And that was among the least memorable on Borat. Borat every day was, that was probably, I doubt I'll ever have an adventure on that level again. It was a true adventure in terms of you are running for your life from cops or angry people with guns and you don't know what's going to happen.
Well, then maybe give us one when you're 83 years old. It's the one that you'll remember, whether it's from Borat or it's from any other movie or show.
I mean, the stories on set, nothing compares to, it's like you're legally robbing a bank, the kind of rush you get is his team that works with him. I see what, it's hard to compare anything afterwards to that. Like we did that scene in the Debutante Ball where we had infiltrated a real event in Macon, Georgia at this historic house and they were going to do a dance and they do this dance that made people very confused at first and then as they were leaving, starting to get annoyed, and someone yells, like, don't you see we've been Borated? And everyone gets really angry. And by this point, we've gotten Sasha and Maria, who played his daughter, far away. And we were staying at a hotel 40 miles away. But I'm still there trying to get the crew out and making sure everyone's okay. And my name was Chris, my kind of code name. I bleached my hair because Sasha thought it looked less Jewish, and people would trust me more when we were going through these towns in the South. And so I was just like, I got out and I was like, let me just make sure everyone's out. I stepped back in to the back door of this house and just hear people running, these like guys running down the stairs screaming, "Where the F is Chris?" And And it really took me a minute where I was like, oh, who's Chris? He's in trouble. I was like, oh, no, I'm Chris. I got to get out of here. And I ran out, and one of the camera operators who was still up there said it was like 7 guys ripping off their jackets, like ready to beat me up. And I just gunned it, and it was like a 1-lane road, and there was a car coming at me. And I was like, oh, if this is one of those guys who's coming around the back to get me, I'm boxed in, I'm trapped. And luckily it was a PA, and I was able to get out and just gunned it, 40 miles back to the hotel. But it was, there were other things like that where, you just got to get out of there. It's not, if people call cops, it's legal to flee. They can't hold you. Cops can hold you, but people can't make you stay. So if you get out of there, and people were just mad because, often people would call police because they were just confused. They thought, is this like a robbery? Rudy thought it was like an extortion attempt. He didn't know it was a comedy movie. So people just don't know what's going on, and they call the police, and it gets sticky. Yeah.
It's legal to flee. I think we all learned something. The next time someone calls the police on me.
So I can't believe they didn't cover that in film school.
You're just leaving. You can leave. Yeah, you can't leave if you're being detained. But
I'm just,
again, we were so careful on that movie to never be doing anything actually illegal. Sometimes it had the appearance of something illegal, but there were never any crimes committed. So you can do something legal and leave a place, and then the cops would get there, and eventually tempers would cool, or they'd decide it wasn't worth a chase because they'd be like, "What'd they do? They steal something?" Well, no. Well, what'd they do? Oh, they did a dance and she was on her period. What? Okay, we're going home. Yeah, sounds like you just had an experience you weren't happy with.
The irony that the movie also covers a very extremist rally where it seemed like half the people had AK-47s over their shoulder, but the big danger came from a debutante ball.
Right.
At the gun rally, they boxed in our escape vehicle and tried to kill us as well. And that was also very intense.
Oh,
and I was in
I'm really curious what Jason is going to work on next.
Me too. I nothing quite announceable yet, but I mean, yeah, these things tend to stay in secret for a while. But yeah, I've got things brewing. I've got a few scripts I'm trying to push through, and we'll see what I can get made.
That's great. Well, I want to thank you for joining us, of course, but also creating so much content that we love. I mean, what we do in the shadows, the episodes you've done, the orgy episode.
That was fun. I love those guys.
I would imagine. And, I didn't mention it in the opening, but because we only did one episode of it, but New Girl is a show we love so much. You only did one episode of that. Oh, wow. But it was the episode that introduced Tran, Nick's elderly Asian mute mentor character. So it's a legendary epic episode in our books. So you've just worked on so much. Congratulations on just so many levels of success. I guess I got to ask for my mom, who I'm sure will be listening. You grew up like I did, watching Chris Elliot on Get a Life, and then you got to direct him on Adult Swim with the TV show Eagleheart. What was it like working with Chris Elliot? And we'll let you go at this. Oh gosh, I mean, he's my hero. So I love him. I never thought we'd become friends, but I love him like family now. And yeah, it's just a dream. I've been very fortunate in my career, and the most rewarding times is when you really feel like you're part of a continuum of things, and people influence him that he worshipped, and then I grew up worshiping him and got to work with him on something we were both proud of, and hopefully I can just kind of keep passing it down, and that's just how it all goes. Just so just to be part of this greater thing where and to what you were asking before about comedy when it's obsessive fans are really connecting over a shared worldview in some ways. And so when you can find people you connect with on that level, you feel like you know them already. And I've gotten to become friends with so many people I really admire. I just feel incredibly lucky. So yeah, it's not the funniest answer, but
no, I think it's great. I think it's stories are the thread that kind of hold us all together, man. So I think there's something that you should be obviously proud of, that you've been a part of those stories, and those stories are never going to go anywhere. And then you've got a whole bunch more that you're going to eventually make. So we're excited to see what happens.
Oh, thanks, guys. Thanks so much for having me on. This was such a pleasure.
It was good. And as always, for all of our listeners, fantastic stories are everywhere. If you hear of one, if you experience one, let us know, and you might be inducted as the next member of the Fantastic Story Society. Thanks, everybody.